Hi, my name is Paulina. I am from Meta. I lead our global policy and governance initiatives on AI. I'm here to talk to you about making AI more explainable. So we're going to do a quick presentation, and then we're going to have a conversation with my esteemed colleagues here, both online and in the room. They will all introduce themselves throughout, but you will see their names, of course, on the deck. So we can go forward with the first slide. So if you guys can just do my screen share up on the slides, that would be great. Thank you. Okay. So making AI more explainable. I'm going to take you on a journey. We're going to go through how AI powers everything we do at Meta. Then we're going to talk about AI transparency, what it is, why do we need it? We're going to talk about the role of AI documentation and other artifacts. We're going to talk about AI system cards, and then we're going to get into a panel discussion. Before we do that, let's talk about what AI is, just so we're all on the same page. So we at Meta define artificial intelligence as the capability of computer systems to do things that otherwise human intelligence is capable of. And the way we do that is multifarious, and I will show you that in a second. And when I say the words AI system, that means a bunch of machine learning models and other non-AI techniques that work together to produce some kind of an experience. So the tools are varied. I know generative AI is really hot right now, and everyone is talking about OpenAI and Llama 2 and other things like that. And that's great and wonderful. And I will talk to you about that as well. But the tools come in many forms and sizes, right? We have computer vision, we have natural language processing, we have diffusion models, and then we use it to do all kinds of things. So at Meta, we use AI to do ranking, to do recommender systems, to do ads. We do it for classifiers and removing bad content from the platform. We do it to downrank specific types of content. We also use it in our user-facing tools like video subtitles and assistants and things like that. We also do it for a lot of our playful filters, and then we use it a ton in the metaverse, because in order to enable the metaverse, in order to enable the technologies that people wear on their faces so that they can have these virtual reality experiences, a lot of AI needs to do the processing in order for that reality to come to life. And also the AI needs to be able to read the things that are happening on your face and how your eyes are tracking so that you can have those fun experiences in VR. All of that is AI. Most of it is not generative AI. So AI explainability and AI transparency. What is it and why do we need it? I think we're going to talk about this a lot on the panel. We need it because consumers don't know what it is. We want consumers and people to trust what AI is. And already AI in the wild is everywhere. And in some cases, it influences very important decisions. It influences your ability to get a particular line of credit. It influences whether you can get an apartment. It influences whether you can take an exam. And so these are really important use cases. Again, not generative AI, just, run-of-the-mill old AI. So what does it mean for AI explainability and transparency? I'm not talking about just the terms themselves. Those are complicated terms, but we don't need to get into it. But what AI explainability means something different to different people. So if I'm trying to explain AI, how a particular AI system works to a developer, I would go into pretty complicated analyses of how the system works and how it's different than another system and what makes this particular model different than another one. If I'm talking to a user, then I can't say any of that because nobody would understand. And if I'm talking to my mom about AI, I need to be able to explain it one way. But when I'm talking to my sister, who's a doctor, she's also a Meta user, but that transparency might look a little bit different. So this concept of different audiences need different levels of transparency is really important. And the way that we have done it at Meta is divided into these categories and created an AI explainability framework toolkit. So then there's, for most audiences, they need basic awareness that AI is taking place. Then they might want additional transparency about individual decisions about how the experience works. Then you might want more holistic product explainability to explain an overall AI system. And then for developers and for researchers, they might need model explainability. So things about the models themselves. Now, in practice, how do we do this? There are many artifacts that exist already. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants right now. There's a lot of work that's already been done on AI explainability. So these are the various artifacts that exist. Model cards is probably the most recognizable one to all of you. And model cards is a short and sweet tool that explains how individual models work. And the idea behind these artifacts originally was that if you understand the parts, you will be able to understand the sum of its parts. But there's a flaw to that logic a little bit because of what I said before. Just because you understand like a very small detail about a model, you might not be able to understand a whole system. But let's walk through an example. I don't know if any of you know, but yesterday we launched a new next generation open source large language model called Llama. It is available publicly by developers and innovators, everyone. And this is a developer tool. These are two versions of a model, a pre-trained model, a fine-tuned model, and we've released it out for developers to then take and fine-tune further for any type of use case they may want, except the ones prohibited by the license. So because it's for developers, we came out with the artifacts also for developers. So each model instance comes with the model code, the model weights, a user guide on how to implement that, a starter guide, a responsible use guide, a license and acceptable use policy, and a model card. None of these things are super user friendly, right? These are specifically for developers because this is a developer tool. But they're really important artifacts because these are the tools that developers have come to expect. And it also comes with a very detailed, in-depth research paper that goes even further, describing all of the safety features and fine-tuning features and everything that we put into that model. Okay, then what's the role of user-facing transparency? Users who use our products every single day also want to understand how AI works. They might not need as much detail as a model card, but they're curious. And so we have tools on our system called Why Am I Seeing This? And it's a way for users to be able to understand why they see specific content in their feeds. It's also a way for them to understand why they see specific ads. And we think these tools are really important. And it's also important, how do you make them accurate while also saying as little as possible so that somebody can actually look at the screen and understand what's going on. So that is, like, if you remember, the second line on the framework of how we interact with users related to AI transparency. But you know what? Some users want to know more, and policymakers and regulators want to know more. And we get questions like, I want to know the algorithm. Okay. And then let me just break it to you guys. There's not one algorithm. There's hundreds of algorithms across our systems that are constantly working to refine and define how users interact. And not only, and we think of it as something that it's like an ensemble, right? An ensemble of wait, but this is an ensemble, but it's too linear. So is it really an ensemble like this, or does it look more like an ensemble like this, where different people at different stages are doing different things that ultimately give you the experience? And in this case, it's Aaron Burr singing in Hamilton, right? So this is more closely looking like, starting to look like an AI model or an AI system. Let's go even further. This is actually what an AI system looks like. It's very complicated. It's really, really intense. So this is what we were trying to solve, where we had the model cards and then we had the user experience. But what about that space in between? How do you explain how an overall AI system works together so that policymakers, civil society, researchers, and users who are not novel users, but users who do understand a little bit about technology can understand how these very complicated AI systems work together, how the different models are cobbled together to make this experience. And that's how we created AI system cards. AI system cards are a way to address these complex transparency problems in a repeatable, scalable way. And we did this with a lot of research first. So it took us 3 years to launch system cards because we did a ton of research to first understand whether they're needed, whether they're responsive to specific regulation, and whether and what parts of them people actually need to see. So we launched 22 system cards last month. Iga is here with me and she will talk about how fun that was for her. She was the lead on the entire work stream. So we launched 14 system cards for Facebook and 8 system cards for Instagram. And these are ranking and recommender systems. And this is not all of our ranking and recommender systems. People just think of like, oh, Instagram, the algorithm, or like, oh, Facebook, the algorithm. No, it's hundreds of algorithms, hundreds of models, and at least 14 systems on Facebook and 8 systems on Instagram, but there's more. These are just like the most popular ones and the most common ones that users see. Let me just show you quickly what it looks like. So we have a landing page where we introduce the 22 system cards. We describe what our approach to ranking is and what every system card holds. We also describe that they're dynamic and that they change over time. All of this is available for you guys to look at as well. So this is on our transparency page, our approach to explaining ranking. And we go into detail about how they're dynamic. And then these are the actual system cards. So there's a whole list of Facebook ones, as I said before, there's a whole list of Instagram ones. And let me just very quickly run you through what each system card has. And you can pull up a bunch of them at the same time to compare and contrast how each one is the same and how each one is different. None of them are the same. They're all quite different, but what they have in common is a template. So each system card describes an overview of what the AI system is. What are we even talking about here? How it works, how you can customize or control your experience, and the main predictions that power each system. So that means what are the main models within the entire system that work together, that are and have the most important signals to produce the experience. That's the ensemble model that we were talking about before. So this is an example of the Instagram feed recommendations AI system, because we have a certain systems that are for people you follow and people and accounts you are interacting with. And then we have recommendations that Meta makes to you. So this is the feed signal, the Instagram feed recommendations AI system. And as you see, this is the how it works section. This is the order of events. And then these are the individual models that all work together to produce the experience. So all of this is available on that website that I showed you about. And this is another example of a Facebook feed system card. Again, all the same sections, a summary, a how it works, customizations and controls, and then the actual models themselves. So with that, I'm just going to let you know that it was not easy to do this. It took many people, thousands of hours. Each system card takes about 3 months to create with a core group of at least 20 people, and then 70 plus people reviewing and weighing in to make sure that every card is accurate. So this was a behemoth task, but a really important one, because we do believe that in order for us to continue to pave the way for people accepting AI in society, we need to be as transparent as possible about how these very complicated systems work. And this is just a reminder of where we were before we got to a system card. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and start chatting with our amazing panelists here. We're going to do a quick round of intros first, and then we're going to ask you some questions. And I'm just going to move this. All right. So maybe I'm just going to jump to our panelists online first to introduce themselves. Just give who you are and how are you related to the concept of AI explainability. We're going to start with Raman.
Thank you, Paulina, and thank you for the great introduction. So my name is Dr. Raman Chowdhury. I am currently a responsible AI fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. And I also run a consultancy in responsible AI called Parity Consulting. And the reason it's a little bit loud behind me today is actually the reason why I work on one aspect of AI explainability that I work on. I'm actually currently working on public red teaming exercises. So the biggest ever generative AI red teaming exercise, including Meta's new Llama model, will be part of the largest ever open model hackathon. Essentially, it's a capture the flag event at DEF CON. We're expecting thousands of people. Today, we had a launch event at Howard University, which is in the US. It's a historically Black college. And we were really excited to have 30 people here, exploring, learning about red teaming. So that's my contribution to transparency and explainability.
Well, thank you for being here. And Iga?
Hi, everyone. My name's Iga Kozlowska, and I have the honor to work with Polina over the last more than a year on AI transparency at Meta, and in particular, AI system cards. But the journey continues, and then so we're really excited to collect feedback from users and experts and policy stakeholders alike on continuously iterating on and improving AI transparency, particularly with this thing called Gen AI now that's happening. So really excited to be here. Thank you, Polina.
Okay, Dr. Mendoza. Oh, you have, great. You just push it up.
Yeah.
There you go.
You hear me?
Yes.
Hi, how are you? I'm Jonathan Mendoza. I'm Data Protection Secretary at INAI. I have 9 years viewing data protection issues. I are really honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
Hello, everyone. I'm Fabrice Taibel. I'm Executive Director of ITS Real, Institute for Technology and Society. I'm also a member of the DPA Council, Civil Society Council, CNPD. And after 2 postdocs, I became a lawyer during COVID. So that happens as well. It's a pleasure to be here. I think transparency, it's a great topic and requires good expertise from different areas and aspects to understand what it really works.
That note, I presented all kinds of things about AI explainability, and that's the current state of affairs on AI explainability and transparency. But Ramon, do you want to tell us, what is the new frontier of AI explainability? What is your research telling you? And what problems are you trying to solve now on this topic?
Right. And, as folks like Iga mentioned, large language models and generative AI are really a hot topic at the moment, but also we can't forget that there are many different kinds of models that are in use today. So prior to what I'm doing today, I was Twitter's Director of Machine Learning Ethics, Transparency, and Accountability. And the big questions that I'm seeing now are also big questions I see before, which is about model transparency, access to data and information. During my time at Twitter, we invested in the use of privacy enhancing technologies to enable access to data and models. But also, the current large language model revolution has not just been a revolution in technology, it's been a revolution in access. So now all kinds of people, even people who cannot program, can look at these models. So the question here and the goal here is, how do we get more perspectives and voices into the room, because now there are many different ways models are being used. And also we're seeing a lot more focus from a policy perspective.
And Dr. Mendoza, what is the role of regulators here? What kind of transparency artifacts and mechanisms and tools are important to you? And is it just about the models, or is there also a transparency to how we engage with regulators as they're trying to develop these these regulations?
Thank you, Paulina. I need to back up various steps to take a statement in the authority, in the Data Protection Authority, as it is possible. As we know, AI systems are information processing technologies that integrate models and algorithms with the ability to learn and perform cognitive tasks, resulting in prediction and decision-making in physical and virtual environments. AI systems can be used as a bridge between human beings and computers, putting into perspective differential ethical issues that include the impact on decision-making in different situations of our daily lives, such as in the workplace, social interaction, health sector, education, among others. As technology advances and we become more dependent on digital devices and services, and the amount of personal data collected, processed grows exponentially. Besides personal data, protection authorities must understand the importance of developing these technologies and guide people through the implications they generate. Like the rest of the world, Mexico and Latin America region have experienced the exponential progress of digital technologies. While these advances provide numerous benefits, but also represent serious challenges to our privacy. That being said, Mexico has made progress on AI issues in the past. In 2018, CMINDS, Oxford Insights, and the British Embassy in Mexico developed the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy. It was later adopted by the National Digital Strategy Coordination, positioning Mexico at this time as one of the 10 countries in the world to have an AI strategy. Also, in the end, it was not promoted by the government. In addition, new ethical challenges arise from AI algorithms, since in some cases they reproduce and reinforce existing biases, which can intensify discriminatory, unfair, and stereotyping behaviors. To reduce this, UNESCO issued the recommendation on the ethics of the artificial intelligence, which proposes that member states establish regulatory frameworks or mechanisms as a main action. In order to ensure that private sector companies, universities, and research institutions, as well as civil society, adhere to them by supporting the development of impact assessment tools on human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and ethics. In this way, it will be possible to prevent and mitigate the risks that these new technologies imply, and in that way, be able to account for their impact on human rights, the rule of law, and inclusive societies. The socioeconomic effects of these systems must also be evaluated in order to ensure that they do not increase with the massive adoption of technologies between countries and within them, the current and future digital and socioeconomic divide. In the case of the public sector, governments should adopt regulatory frameworks that establish procedures for public authorities, in particular, to carry out ethical impact assessment of AI systems in order to anticipate the repercussions, mitigate the risks, avoid harmful consequences, facilitate citizen participation, and address societal challenges. It should also establish appropriate surveillance mechanisms such as auditability, traceability, and explainability that allow algorithms, data, and design process to be evaluated. And an initiative promoted by Meta with the support and participation of INAI, Data Protection Authority in Mexico, is the Open Loop program, which consists of working with a group of Mexican companies that use AI as part of their product or service to test the prototype before issuing public policy recommendations to INAI as an input to present a governance framework for transparency and explainability in AI systems. Transparency and explainability are responsible for promoting that users be aware when they are interacting with AI systems, and therefore they can be informed of the capabilities and limitations of the system and have a clear understanding of how a particular result was reached. Where is Mexico going? In this way, Mexico seeks to establish mechanisms in collaboration, international organizations, transnational companies, university institutions, civil society, and the innovation ecosystem to facilitate creation of AI governance frameworks focused on transparency and explainability that are pragmatic, inclusive, and operational. A Mexican initiative in development is the National Artificial Intelligence Alliance, ANIA, which serves as a multi-stakeholder mechanism whose mission is to recognize and strengthen the artificial intelligence ecosystem in Mexico to maintain an open dialogue on AI and its impacts with an integral, plural, and multidisciplinary perspective, and with the participation of different stakeholders and society in general. ANIA is an initiative that brings together the public and private sectors, civil society, academia, experts, and various stakeholders whose main line of work is to formulate a document of public policy recommendations that helps in the construction of a national strategy for artificial intelligence in Mexico. Thank you.
Great. So question to Iga, like based on what Dr. Mendoza just said, do you see parallels with this type of multi-stakeholder government and non-government initiatives working together to develop a framework with how we had a multi-stakeholder what?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that resonates quite a bit. You know, I'm a sociologist by training, and definitely, you know, in my experience, have brought that academic perspective into, or tried to, into the tech industry, and to bring a bunch of different professionals and folks with different experiences and backgrounds and disciplines into the conversation, because these are ultimately socio-technical systems. And so initiatives like Open Loop and collaborations with nonprofits and governments and regulators are absolutely critical to getting this right. I think it really behooves everyone, each one of those expert groups and stakeholders, to understand how to approach AI transparency and explainability, how to do it well, how to meet people and users and consumers where they are, and how to deliver ultimately the most impactful, most effective transparency solutions that we can. So I very much appreciate that sentiment of bringing kind of cross collaboration and a multidisciplinary perspective to this challenging and complex space.
And when you were leading this massive project over the years, did you have a multidisciplinary team that worked with you?
Yeah, most definitely. So the 30 plus team members that Polina had mentioned earlier, that was composed of not only machine learning engineers and research scientists and data scientists coming from very deep technical backgrounds, but it was also product designers and content designers and technical writers and user experience researchers that had many conversations and studies and feedback loops with average consumers and users of our products. And all of those key functions were absolutely critical to coming together and putting something like AI system cards together. It wouldn't have happened if it came just from a technical perspective, and it wouldn't have happened if it came just from a kind of social perspective. Those things had to come together to, I think, bring that that level of transparency and explainability in the way that we were able to do in system cards.
And Dr. Steibel, can you talk a little bit about, you know, the civil society approach to AI explainability? Where is your organization on it? How important is it? Talk to us about trust.
Sorry, thank you very much for the question, Paulina. So I will focus my answer on the end, and I'll explain it. If this was an audience of devs and startup people, I will focus on risks and preventions. But because this is an audience of privacy people, legal studies, I will focus on innovation. And the end is that for transparency to happen and for trust to be achieved, we need protection and innovation. And this is an important debate here in Brazil. We talk lots about risks, but we talk very few about innovation. It seems like something that the private sector should be doing. And as a multi-stakeholder approach, innovation is what we need. I'll give an examples with open LLMs. So Meta launched Llama, open technology is what you use to pay for bank accounts. When there is the locker, that's open technology. If you use Android, 90% of you do, lots of open technologies there. If I use an LLM to talk to a terminal cancer patient about his health and his heritage in his last moments, this is a high risk event. For that, we need lots of burden. If you want to do that, lots of things you have to have compliance with, including transparency to establish trust. But if you are developing an LLM to speak how Brazilian speaks, broken Portuguese, so you can provide access to services then for the government, you should not have all this burden. You need sandboxes, you need incubators, you need places where people can try and error. So when you look at the EU Act, when you look at the Brazilian regulation, what you see is that we need to find the right balance between innovation and protection. And there is no way we're going to find a solution for transparency and trust if we only focus on the risks. The risk is important. We don't need less attention to risks, but we do need more attention to innovation. And not innovation that just happens, but innovation that is fostered by government, by private sector, by civil society.
Love that. I think it's really important to talk about the benefits of the technologies. I think all of us kind of in the space who work in it assume that people understand the benefits, but I think you're right. Like when you're talking to a group of privacy professionals, like most people are really just thinking about the risks. So maybe I'm going to pass it back to Ramon to tell us a little bit about the benefits and the type of research that you're doing to uncover like who are these different stakeholders and how do they work together, and what have you found in your research about the types of transparency that's necessary to all these different people?
Yes, absolutely. So I have been an audit consultant with the ECAT team, so the folks who've written the Digital Services Act. And as part of that work, and also sort of separately funded research, I'm looking into aspects of accomplishing the goals set out in legislation like Digital Services Act Article 40, but also in other legislation we've seen, for example, in the US, the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act. So we do clearly see people wanting transparency, and the research I'm conducting is on what that really means. So our key stakeholders we're looking at run the gamut. So Pauline, I really appreciate that slide of like what types of explainability are people looking for. The same thing, people use the term transparency. Automatically, a lot of regulatory minds jump to, oh, people want access to data and models. So the persona types we're looking at is everyone from a policymaker, a regulator, a red teamer, an ethical hacker, a researcher, an auditor, like an independent auditor, and also this class of people that we've been calling innovators. And innovators, I think, goes to that point of people who want to build things on your models. So this could be something like a plugin for Llama, or it could be, you know, building a whole new product or some sort of a service or an offering, but they just want to make sure that the model's performing the way they think it should, or run their own tests on it. And that's a really critically important and almost like a new class of user that's being introduced. So when we say we want transparency, and when we say that there are regulations and laws being passed around improving algorithmic transparency, the first question is, you know, who are these people? The second is, what do they want to use it for? And third is actually testing the feasibility of even building an environment like this. So the second set of people that we're interviewing are people who would be experts in privacy, security, and intellectual property. So is it even feasible to allow individuals access? How would you structure and craft an environment? Are we doing a very traditional style of physical data clean rooms? Can we virtually create these rooms? How can we ensure that people aren't hacking these systems or that, trade secrets aren't being revealed. But, as I think that one of the themes that we have here is all of this is a spectrum. There are many kinds of people that want many kinds of access, and many things answer the questions that they have. I also want to just highlight that I think Iga and Paulina know I'm a huge fan of the system cards you have developed. Even prior to you all launching the system cards, in my input and advice to the DSA folks in developing audit methodologies was, you will need companies to have system cards. And again, this is before I even knew you all were working on this. We needed a way to understand how a system is broken up into models, how the models are fed and built by data, and the business logic and decisioning that happens between them. And even with the research we're doing to map out a framework for this platform, we are seeing the same kinds of questions. Before people want access data and models, they need to understand the business logic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is just like speaking to your point about innovation. In order for innovators to be able to innovate in this space, they also need to trust it, and they need to trust that consumers are going to go and use it, and that there's not like overburdensome regulation. So can you talk about some of the benefits that you have seen in the uses of not just necessarily generative AI technologies, but any type of AI that you've seen in the field?
Sure. I think one of the benefits we want is a healthy ecosystem of solutions. We need things that are big, things that are small, things that are for high profile, low profile, civil society, and others. And one of the challenges of transparency, maybe a negative externality of transparency, is concentrating markets, because this is what data protection does. So the more privacy you have, the more incentives you have for companies that have your data, or for governments to have your data, to have a commercial advantage on that. The remedy for that is legislation. So we need eventually to have different rules for different players to compete. Sometimes we need incentivize innovation as well. Europe had these lessons of data protection with the DMA. They are testing a recipe for that. So how transparency can concentrate markets and how this can be not a benefit for what we have. The thing is, transparency is great, but what we really need is product with trust. So I love the metaphor used of Hamilton. So they have the Hamilton play, and then you have the 100 algorithms that collaborate with that somehow. For large companies, large governments, it's okay to say, explain this, make cards, innovate, because trust depends on that. There's a huge burden on that. For small innovations, for academics, for others, the thresholds needs to be lower. So I would say the benefits of transparency is for sure trust. But we need to adjust the trust according to the player we are talking. Otherwise, the negative externality is market concentration. If transparency is something too hard to achieve, only few players can stay in the game and play it.
I love that. I think that I'd really love to pass it over to you, because I feel like you should have something very specific on that point. Like, is the bar, I think Iga and I showed that slide on how it takes 3 months of 22 people and 70 reviewers to write each one of these types of cards. And as you mentioned, the burden of that is really high, and our company can take that burden, right? But what about the small innovators? What about the people who want to use AI, but don't know where to start? So can you talk a little bit about the framework that you developed through Open Loop, or, that basically describes what is the barrier to entry for transparency tools for artificial intelligence?
Sure, Paulina. Which is the role of the data protection authorities about innovation and technology? That is a good question, because we need to be part of the conversation. I think that legislations could be a solution, but before legislations, we need to prove or use the technology in scenarios that have a public-private collaborations like Open Loop. Use the technology, have conclusions, have recommendations, soft law, and maybe in this moment, we can do legislation and enforcement solutions, because it is important to know who or where or what we are regulate.
My understanding of open loop, especially the one that you guys did in Mexico, is that you worked specifically with smaller startups to test certain ideas about AI transparency and explainability, and made sure that what was it about this framework that was difficult? What was it that was workable, and come out with solutions that would be appropriate for different sized companies as well. So definitely encourage everyone to check out the transparency framework. I'd love to move on to talk a little bit about the use of, as technologies are becoming more pervasive across AI, as we are entering this newer world where consumers really do engage with AI openly through tools like generative AI. Iga, what can we draw from in the various transparency artifacts that we talked about earlier today and that Ramon just talked about, and how can we bring that into the new age of AI?
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. I think this is top of mind for many of us. What does this generative AI revolution mean for data protection as well as AI transparency? And here again, I think we can take a risk-based approach. As a former privacy manager, I know that that's familiar probably to the folks in this room and others in the kind of governance and risk and compliance space. So I think, a couple of things. I think we can definitely take the learnings we've had from traditional or old, kind of ranking and recommender style type of AI use cases, and bring that to the generative AI space. But there are net new kind of questions and challenges. How we know from some, preliminary user research that most people, at least in the United States here, have not yet engaged with tools like ChatGPT. And at the same time, we know that a lot of times users overestimate their understanding of how generative AI works. And so while sometimes struggling to identify what the real benefits are of this new innovative technology. And so there are a lot of kind of moving parts to this, starting from the very beginning of that AI awareness piece, going back to that transparency framework of will people, as this technology gets more embedded into a bunch of different use cases, know that they're interacting with an AI agent or AI generated content, right? That's kind of step zero, right, of transparency in this case. And then kind of going across the different audiences and across the different levels of, okay, how was this image or text or decision generated by AI, and why, and what were the relevant parameters to that decision or to that outcome? And I think, this is really going to kind of, I think Gen AI is going to revolutionize how we and how people engage with AI across a variety of different sectors, tech, of course, social media, of course, but in all the other sectors that were mentioned before, health, education, so on and so forth. So there are probably still more unanswered open questions than we have answers or solutions. But I think the way to start is, again, take that risk-based approach and leverage the learnings that we do have to date in this new space.
So much of what you said needs to be teased apart, and we don't have a ton of time, but I have a couple of follow-ups. So Ramon, based on what Iga just said, wait, is Ramon still here? I'm not seeing her on the screen. Oh, there she is. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, it keeps cutting in and out a little bit. I apologize.
Oh, it's okay. So, you're studying different stakeholders within the space. Iga just talked about the different stakeholders in the space and the fact that like generative AI is changing a lot about how everyone is thinking about AI, period. You talked about the various different types of people and different types of innovators. And you talked about what is the role of the regulator? What is the role of the data protection authority? So I want to tie some of this together. What is the role of different constituents? So like of all of us in the room, because we all come from different backgrounds. What is the role of tech companies in educating consumers about how these things work, especially in the generative AI space? What is the role of regulators to educate consumers about how these products work? And are they only supposed to talk about the risks, or should they also be talking about the advantages, and where is that line? What is the role of civil society? What is the role of technologists? What is the role of independent people? What is the role of academics? I'm very curious because it seems a lot of the time the pressure is really on tech companies to really invest in the space. And I believe in that wholeheartedly, but also would love to know what are the roles of the other entities that we are all part of to bring this space to the forefront and teach people how it works.
Yeah, what a great question. So I testified to the US Congress about 2 weeks ago, and in my testimony, I said that governance is a spectrum. And you're right, Polina, I too was part of industry working on responsible AI. And there are things you understand and access to data and models and internal working knowledge and connections you have that cannot be replicated outside of industry. However, that alone is insufficient. These types of red teaming exercises, bias bounties are such a perfect example of that. When we held the first bias bounty at Twitter, even though that was a model my team had audited, we learned things and because of other approaches people had, whether it was people who were differently abled, people who were in the military, people who wore religious head coverings, right? People came in with their own lived perspective. And this is why we need folks like independent third parties who are actually operating on behalf of their own group that they value and also on behalf of humanity. But also we need regulators and civil society in the room as well. And regulators help, frankly, companies who want to innovate create the right pathway. Another thing I said during that testimony is brakes help a car go faster. In other words, the ability to stop a car is why we can drive 80, 90 miles an hour on the highway. So what I overwhelmingly have found is people who want to build technology systems, they're not looking for regulation to necessarily punish companies. They're looking for regulation so they can understand how to safely innovate. So when you're in this safe fenced area, now you know what you're able to do. But it is the role of civil society, independent parties to identify and surface harms. In my opinion, it's the role of regulators to start addressing these harms, and also to define for companies what a safe playing field is. And it's the role of companies to do our best to identify and proactively address these harms and be responsive when harms come up.
I do a fire round, or what is it called when you go really fast? You just said the car thing. I love that analogy. We're going to use, what is the best analogy you have for AI that helps people understand it a little bit better? Okay. Ramon just said the car. I love that. You need the brakes in order for the car to go fast, and the brakes are the regulations and the car is the innovators, right? What's your favorite analogy? Wait, you got to turn your microphone on.
Thing that comes to my mind are plants.
Why?
Because it really creates an ecosystem. It really grows. So I love the idea of transparency and so on, but the real transparency when you see things connecting. Maybe a message for the people is that AI transparency is not necessarily about personal data. It's not necessarily about people. Climate's full of data that has very few people there. Even Meta has AI algorithms on energy consumption, which are huge for AI and so on. So maybe if you focus less on the personal data aspects and the fabric consumer, the people, the user, we will see that AI is actually way stronger. It's like the internet. It's something that connects people. We haven't understood what AI is yet. It's not a network of computers. It's not a story of data. But if I have to describe it, I would say it's a bioecosystem. It's something that will live with us and make us grow.
Cool. What about you, Dr. Mendoza?
Basketball. Yeah. Why not? We have different players with different roles. All the players need to do his part or their part. And it's important to improve the capabilities of all the players, the teamwork, basketball.
Awesome. Love it. Iga?
Oh gosh, I don't know. This is a tough one, but I don't know. Let me go with like a science analogy, like a microscope, right? So when we're talking about AI transparency and explainability, coming back to this question of different audiences for different needs, like how can we zoom in to that level of data and models for some audiences, and then use the microscope to zoom out to look at our system, AI systems as a whole, and how these things work together. So kind of treating, kind of thinking about transparency at all these different levels across all these different audiences.
We say that AI today is what privacy was 10 years ago, and we always needed a good analogy in order to make privacy understandable both by consumer audiences and regulatory audiences and everybody else that cared about it. And so we're always looking for these new analogies to make these conceptualizations come to life. So thank you for indulging me on that one. I would love to take some questions from the audience if there are any. Because I can go on about this for hours, but I want to make sure that we're talking to you guys as well. I will walk around with a mic. I'm going to start in the back here. Oh, yes, please.
Thanks so much. And I'll frame my question with my own slightly darker analogy, which is the proverb of the blind men describing an elephant, each touching a different part and not having the ability to necessarily describe the entire thing. That's sometimes how I feel when I'm in academia, when trying to understand it myself, explain it to others. And so my question is from the perspective of, let's say, an average consumer. So much of AI, at least if we're still in its infancy, is used to personalize or individualize experiences that used to be standard, right? Could be the price you pay, the sort of service you're offered. And what does it mean for consumers or users for us not to share the same life world, so to speak? If we're not all paying the same price, we're not all getting the same kind of service, we're all being offered a sort of tailored reality. When we think about the horizontal relationships amongst consumers, when the capital W, when we get together and try to decide what we think about the market, what we think about proper regulation, how do we address this issue of kind of balkanized experiences that these technologies create? Because the technology itself is hard enough to explain, right? But even if we're not talking about the tech, just the day-to-day experiences people are having within the ecosystems are more and more different from each other. And to me, that suggests almost a problem with almost a democratic problem in terms of how we can have a collective conversation at all about, whether these are good or bad, who the winners and losers are, things like that. So I know it's a big question, but I'm just interested in people's reflection on what I think is a sort of under-discussed challenge that we face as we try to, as you all have been talking about, build public understanding and create the conditions for sort of an intelligent and useful conversation.
I feel like I can assign this to somebody, but I'm just going to give at least my answer here. So when it comes to personalization, this is exactly the reason that we really want to be as transparent as possible so that people can at least understand what personalization means, that it's not us listening to their microphone. It's that constant tuning of how you interact with the platform. Plus, as Ramon said, whatever business decisions that are being considered pushed into the products so that people understand it. I think there's a regulatory perspective, because when you said that different people get different prices, I mean, that's a regulation question. And that has to be the job, I believe, of regulators to determine whether individual pricing is even possible using AI. But I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of approach. Oh, Iga, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great answer, but I love that question because it's taking a look from that sociological perspective at how all of this works together in our society, in democratic societies, and even Meta's AI system cards, they're great, but they're still a drop in the bucket in terms of the life experiences of the average citizen. So how do you then start comparing, your individualized and personalized experience on Instagram versus some other platforms versus all the other institutions that you interact with that are also using personalization techniques for making some pretty consequential decisions, maybe not what you see in your Facebook feed, but maybe whether you get that credit loan or get hired at a job. And so how can an individual citizen, user, consumer stay on top of all of that, even if they get all the transparency they can get? And that's really where, again, I agree with that, regulation comes in to kind of level set the playing field to make sure there's fair competition, to make sure that companies and government agencies are held accountable, and to kind of keep all of that, keep our society together, in fact, and try to build that trust between citizens and the institutions they interact with. Not saying it's an easy job or solution, but we do need all of those players engaged to make it happen.
It also kind of reminds me of, Raman, your work on red teaming. Like, I think your question specifically, which is a really good one, is the reason that I think Raman is working on bringing a lot of communities to stress test assets. Do you want to just say a few words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do love the metaphor of, the blind man and the elephant, because, I think the way you had framed it, which is totally correct, is when people say they are inspecting a model or inspecting data, they actually grab a very specific component of it. On the other end, when we do, even as companies, when we do model inspections or bias detection, we're actually looking at a very specific part of it. So when we did the first Twitter bias bounty, it was built on an algorithmic audit we had already conducted and put out publicly. And that was specifically around race and gender. But that we knew was not the entirety of all the harms. So we maybe were grabbing the trunk of the elephant, the tail of the elephant, but it required a wide range of people to say, well, the elephant has 4 feet and a broad back and 2 ears. And I think part of it is that this is actually a problem of massive scale, where it's not just about doing analysis or understanding from different components, but even as organizations identifying harms and biases, as these models are general purpose and they are bigger and bigger, even identifying that is the same analogy of, touching different parts of an elephant.
Thanks. So this is more to the Meta team. So, the system cards, as you described them, is more of an individual empowerment tool. It's about information at the hands of the individual. But we also know that a lot of accountability is fostered when you are able to zoom out and detect patterns, not just know what's happening to me, but when civil society or researchers are able to know what's happening to thousands of people and then, foster accountability based on that. So is there something built into the system card to enable that in a privacy preserving way for third parties to be able to access, exactly what people are viewing in a system card and critique that?
No, but we are working on it. So, and also Raman is working on that too, because that's exactly Article 40 of the DSA that makes that request of like, what information is available to researchers. But I feel I mean, yeah, I know the question is for Meta, but I'm curious as to your take on this, Fabro, like what does the platformization of these assets look like for you? And will that accomplish the goal, like Smirta said, on accountability, or what do you think?
I think we are lagging behind on the terminologies to describe it. So one thing is open data. People understand open data as all open, all closed. We need layers of open data. Data that is open for academics, data that is open for this part of the systems and so on. So when we talk about data trusts or talk about other data ecosystems, we are still trying to understand is not the data is from the platforms or not the platforms, but these layers of data. This is something that we are lagging behind. And another thing that we are lagging behind understanding it is how do we frame the problem? So what Romana said about not isolating one part, but looking at it as an infection, it's a good metaphor for this information. You can't find in one post why that content contains this information because it has been fact-checked and so on. But to really solve the problem, you need to go to politicians, you need to go to the media, you need to go to society, you need to go to a different arrangements of problems. So maybe what is missing this platformization is that sometimes we're asking data and platforms to deliver more than they should. It's like we forget that there is a real life and other actors and other data is on the companies related to that. So I think we have a limited framing for that, which leads to the idea of the importance of platformization, but also the limitation of it to address real problems.
Yeah. Part of the system card launch also simultaneously, we launched a feed signal publication. So specifically like diving even deeper on like the actual individual signals so that can be studied. And then we also have our transparency center. But that's the like, you know, as much data as you put out into the world, there's still limitations. So I really look forward to Ramon's paper on this topic about platformization of data, because I do think that's going to be really epic in the space. I don't know if you have a few words on that.
I do, but actually it's really funny. I was just messaging my co-author yesterday saying, you know, Meta releasing Llama has introduced a whole new level to our paper because it is actually some of that, you know, some of that access and transparency in practice, but also kind of flipped on its head. So I love that you all are sort of pushing the envelope for responsible release as it relates to more openness in models. I think that's a critical aspect of it, right? So part also of this transparency platform is thinking through on the spectrum of openness, what is a reasonable expectation of responsible model release, given how open or closed you want your model to be? And that's not necessarily this paper, but that is one thing that's going on in my head as I think through this platformization of data challenge that we're addressing.
Another question, please, if you got them. All right, cool. We answered everything. We solved every problem. I'm really excited about this. Well, I really want to thank you all for your time. I know this was like very late at an already late conference, and I'm really thankful to you all for staying late, for joining late. I mean, but it's been a very fruitful and wonderful discussion. I had a great time. I hope you did too. And yeah, with that, I think, is this the end of the day? Is there more stuff going on today? No. Okay. All right. We did it, you guys.